Today I thought I'd do a lesson on modes. A lot of times people teach modes as a scale, but there's a little more to it than that. Modes are based on the major scale formula, which is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And what that looks like on the guitar here is we've got any note you start on, and then a whole step is when you skip a note. So we just skipped F, right? So whole step, half step, whole step, whole step. Let me scoot up. Whole step, and then half step. And I just did that on the high E string so you can see what I'm talking about here. But let me map that out. E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D sharp. We don't have to do it linearly like that. We can start here and we go whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. That is a major scale. So I want to just take the notes of the scale here. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we're back to 1. And what I want to show you is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So if we move in a circle, this is a kind of a helpful, fun way to think about modes. Okay, let's actually plop a C major scale in here. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. I'll get rid of this. This is your typical C major scale. If we start on C, and then we got whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, right? If we pick a different note of the scale to start on, we have a mode. So a lot of people learn modes like this, and it's not a bad way to learn them. If I want to play a D Dorian scale, I can start on D, and I can use all the notes from a C major scale. Now we have different whole steps and half steps. So we got D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. And what a lovely sound. Lovely. This typical way of learning modes, which I'll go through it a little bit more because it's a great starting point, it actually kind of misses the point of a lot of modes. There are major modes and minor modes, and there is Locrian, kind of the weirdo. And this is what I'm leading to here. So let's get back in here. If we start on D, right, and we say D is the starting note for the Dorian scale here, then what actually is happening is we're going whole, half, whole, 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 half, whole. So actually a Dorian scale, it's less about what note of the scale we're starting on, and it's more about the whole steps and half steps. If we go up to E here, and we say, okay, we're gonna start here, this is the root note, but we're still playing notes from a C major scale. So we've got half, whole, 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 half, whole, whole. Listen to how that sounds. Right, and a lot of people learn their modes this way. And let me just remove this root note, and you can think about this idea of, again, it's not a bad way to learn your modes. If you set out like a major scale and you say, okay, starting on the first note of that scale, that's a major scale. Starting on the second note of a major scale, that's a Dorian scale. Starting on the third note of a major scale, that's called a Phrygian scale, which I can write this out too. Starting on the fourth note of a major scale, that is called a Lydian scale. Starting on the fifth note of the scale, that is called a Mixolydian scale. Mixolydian is sounds like this. And then starting on the sixth note of the scale, we have the minor scale, also called Aeolian. I always think of mayonnaise. And then when we start on the seventh note of the scale, we have Locrian. And then we're back. So this is the way that a lot of people learn modes, and it's very problematic, because what people end up doing is they start saying things like, okay, I want to play a C Dorian scale. And it's like, okay, great. So now I lay out a C major scale, and now I'm going to play starting on D. And it's like, nope, actually, now if you start on D, whatever the root note of the scale is, you're playing a D Dorian scale. So what if you want to play a C Dorian scale? What do? I want to show you the modes in a different way. This stuff here, if I just erase it all, instead of putting actual notes in here, we just kind of do a little labeling here. So if we start here and we go through this circle of whole steps and half steps, we get the major scale. If we start here, we get a Dorian scale. If we start here, we get what's called a Phrygian scale. And if we start here, oh, you haven't been able to see my face this whole time. If we start here, we get what's called a Lydian scale. If we start here, we get what's called a Mixo-Lydian scale. If we start here, we get just the minor scale, but it's also called Aeolian, Aeolian. And then this one is called Locrian. So, whoa, you'd think I'd be better at talking and writing words as a teacher, but nope, never gets easier. So these are the basic mode map, but this doesn't make this isn't really helpful. What do we do with this? Like, what do you do with this information? It doesn't seem like there's anything useful going on right now. So let's figure out how to make this useful and also how to kind of categorize these modes better. A better way, in my opinion, to think about modes is to think about major modes and minor modes. But before we do that, I want to make sure you understand a pretty basic concept, and that is the idea of a major scale and its relative minor. We already talked about how a major scale formula is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. The minor scale formula is whole, half, whole, whole, half, whole, whole. Let's start on A this time. So let's just keep that root note here. So if we were to play an A major scale, we start on A and we go whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And if we were to play an A minor scale, we would go whole, half, whole, whole, half, whole, whole. I'll show you why this is relevant in a minute. If you notice, if I put those notes in, hang on a sec, those are all the same notes as a C major scale. And if we double check here, we put the root note over here. I didn't change any notes, I just changed the root note. If we put the root note here, we get whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And it turns out every minor scale fits in some major scale, and every major scale contains a minor scale without having to change any notes. In other words, I can build a C major scale, and I can build an A minor scale using the same set of notes. What this also means, and this to me is where a lot of people miss how cool modes are, is if you've seen any of my other live streams especially, you'll know that I like to talk about chords in a key. And the chords in the key of, let's go to C major for a second again, just to really drive this point home. The chords in the key of C major are, you basically play every other note starting on the first note of the scale until you get a chord, and that is the 1 chord in the key of C major is a C major chord. The 2 chord in the key of C major is a D minor chord. The 3 chord is an E minor chord. I'll show you, check this out. E, G, and B, that's an E minor. The 4 chord and 5 chord and 6 chord, we're gonna just do all the chords here. We've got an F chord based on the 4th, 6th, and 1st note of the scale. A G chord based on the 5th, 7th, and 2nd note of the scale. And then we've got A minor, A, C, E, based on the 6th, 1st, and 3rd note of the scale. And then we've got B diminished based on the 7th, 2nd, and 4th note of the scale. Those are all the chords in the key of C major. Now, hang on a second. Remember how I said A minor shares all the same notes? Well, I guess that means it shares all the same chords, right? And it turns out, absolutely. These are all the chords in the key of C major. And if I just go A minor, B diminished, well now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we're back to 1. These are all, A minor shares all the same chords with C major. I'll prove it to you. Check it out. We've got A, C, E. That's the 1 chord in the key of A minor. We've got B, D, F. That's the 2 chord in the key of A minor. C, E, G, the 3 chord. Because we have all the same notes going on, that means the key of C major and the key of A minor, they're the same chords. What do we do with this information? Well, you know how songs can be in minor keys and songs can be in major keys. For example, if I were to play, let me pop this back up. If I were to play the 1 chord and the 5 chord, we're kind of just goofing around in the key of A minor. And if I were to play the 1 chord and the 5 chord in the key of C major, well, that would sound like this. Just kind of making something up. But the idea here is modes are not just about playing scales. They're also about a set of chords you can mess around with. And this is why I laid this out earlier. Have I enticed you to learn more about major modes and minor modes? I hope so. I think I want to do this in the key of A major and A minor, actually. So we're going to go back here. And we're going to make an A major scale. A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A. Right? Here's an A major scale. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. If we look at this chart over here, major goes play a note, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Well now, if we start on that same note, but we think about, okay, let's start here. We're like this. We've got whole, whole, half, whole, whole, half, whole. So in other words, what I'm trying to show you on this chart is the difference between a major scale and a mixolydian scale. There's actually 1 note different. They both start out with whole, whole, half, whole, whole, but a major scale ends with whole, half, and a mixolydian scale ends with half whole. What you end up with is a few different ways to think about a mixolydian scale. So this is major, and then this right here, we were gonna amend it like this to make it a mixolydian scale. And I keep saying it weird, it's just mixolydian. You don't have to say mixolydian. There's 2 ways to think about this. One way is to just say, okay, the major scale formula is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And the mixolydian scale is whole, whole, half, whole, whole, half, whole. That's a fine way to think about it. But a lot of people think of it as mixolydian is like a major scale, but with a flat 7. And if you look over here, that is a mixolydian scale. Instead of playing G sharp, I'm playing what would be a flat G sharp. It's just a G. So the difference between an A major scale and an A mixolydian scale is 1 note. And part of the reason people call it a major mode is because the 1st, 3rd, and 5th notes of that scale still give you a major chord. So if I throw this G in here, let's do blue. That right there is the note that we swap to make an A mixolydian scale. Right? That's it. That's the difference. I want this major scale in the middle. The Lydian scale also only has 1 note different from a major scale. Let's look at this chart over here. The major scale formula is whole, whole, half. Whole, 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 half. Let's look at the Lydian scale. We start here and we go whole, 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 half, whole, whole, half. So this looks like it's got 1 note different as well. Back over here, whole, 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 half, whole, whole, half. So in this case, what we're doing is we are erasing this. We're replacing it with a half here and a whole here. Then we're turning this D into a D sharp. What you could say is a Lydian scale compared to a major scale has a sharp 4. Let's put that in pink. The pink one here represents an A Lydian scale. And the blue one represents a Mixolydian scale. Cool, huh? So the cool thing about both of these scales is if you were to treat them as if they were a key, the one chord in that key would still be a major chord. So this is why we group them as major modes. Let's do the same thing with the minor key, and then maybe we'll write some music to kind of show how people tend to use this stuff. For the minor modes, so here I'm going to use an A minor scale. Whole, half, whole, whole, half, whole, whole. This is the minor scale, also called A, E, O, like aioli. That's why I think of mayo. I figured it out. Let's go back to this little chart over here. Sorry to make anyone dizzy. So just like we saw, whole, half, whole, whole, half, whole, whole. That is the formula to make a minor scale. Let's check out Dorian here. This goes whole, half, whole, 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 half, whole. So again, we've got one note different. Dorian mode. So Dorian mode is whole, half, whole, 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 half, whole. So we got to erase this little guy here and this guy here, and we swap these for whole and half. The result is Dorian mode is just like a minor scale, but with a sharp 6th note. The difference between an A minor scale and an A Dorian scale is one note, and that we'll put in blue again. Right? That's the difference. And because both of them start with A, C, and E in their scale, right? The C isn't changed, the E isn't changed. It's just that this F gets swapped for an F sharp. They both kind of count as minor modes, because if you were going to build a set of chords, which we'll do in a minute, if you were to build a set of chords based on one of these scales, the one chord, the chord based on the 1st, 3rd, and 5th note, would still be a minor chord. What's going on with Phrygian? I'm going to paste here first, and then we'll go look at the chart to see how do we fix this. And this would be a good thumbnail to be like, oh, he's wrong. I'm going to have to go to that part of the video and correct him. Because if you look at this, oh, you can't even see. Hang on a sec. I'm going to have to hide my face for a minute. If you look at this, right now, it's wrong. We got to fix it. What's wrong with it? Say it with me. The minor scale formula is whole, half, whole, whole, half, whole, whole. Let's check out Phrygian. Oh, it starts with a half. So we got half, whole, 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 half, whole, whole. Well, how different is that? We got that one note different. So what that means here is, if we go to Phrygian, all we got to do is swap this and this. Instead of whole half, it's now half whole. And so that gives us a B flat. That means a Phrygian scale is almost identical to a major scale, except that it has a flat 2. That's it. I can't do flats and sharps simultaneously. So I might just do this and hit my little flats button and then show you this in pink. So here is an A minor scale. And here is an A Phrygian scale. Hopefully this is a more interesting way to look at the modes. And we're not talking about Locrian today. Part of why I don't want to talk about Locrian today is because the one chord that you would build based on Locrian is a diminished chord. So we don't often see music written in a Locrian key, like you would with a Dorian key or something like that. What I want to do here is I'm going to make a little chart. So these are the chords in A minor. What about chords in A Dorian? Is it the same chords? Well, check this out. If we go like this, we make a little scale circle of our own here, which you can always do at home. You don't need fancy software. If you know the scale, you can make a little circle, and then as long as you remember to go to the right like this, everything's going to be fine. This is an A minor scale. This is the note we're going to change. So now we have an F sharp to compare. So does the one chord get affected? A, C, E. The one chord does not get affected. So the one chord is the same. Now let's look at the two chord. B, D, F sharp. Oh, it was B, D, F before, but now it's B, D, F sharp. So that means the two chord in Dorian is a B minor chord. Interesting. The three chord is C, E, G. Okay, that doesn't change. That's just a C chord. What about the four chord? Well, the four chord was D, F, A. It is now D, F sharp, and A. So the four chord in Dorian is a major chord. That's kind of cool. I also see a problem will arise if I don't move this down. So now, if we do this for the rest of the chords, E, G, B, that doesn't change. This was F, A, C, but is now F sharp, A, C, which means, let me write in E minor first. Now we've got an F sharp diminished chord, and then we have G, B, and D, which is unaffected. What the heck does this mean? What do we do? This is weird. Well, it means if we were to write a chord progression, let's say in the key of A minor, and our chord progression was A minor, F, G, D minor, which would be 1, 6, 7, and 5. Well, that chord progression, ooh, that's too nice of a tone. So here, that's A minor, F, G, D minor. Well, that means this chord progression wouldn't really work in Dorian mode because we would have an F sharp diminished chord. We'd still have that G, but then we'd have a major chord. So it would sound like this instead. Weird. What do we do with that? Well, it turns out there are some chord progressions that sound really good in Dorian that you can't do in a major key. And one of those classic chord progressions is A minor, C, G, D, which would be this. Yeah, for those of you who are nerds in the chat, you know that you could probably do this in melodic minor as well. But this right here is a chord progression that works in Dorian mode and does not work in natural minor. Because F sharp is the only note affected, A minor does not have an F sharp, C does not have an F sharp, G does not have an F sharp, D minor does, so D minor becomes D. And this is a classic chord progression that sounds great. Right. Kyle brought up a great question, which is, couldn't you use chords from both since they're parallel, or as a borrowed chord, rather than just like purely staying in that mode? A lot of times what people do is they mainly stay in a major key or a minor key, and then they borrow the cool modal stuff that they like from the other chord progressions. Sometimes there's truly modal stuff that just stays in a mode, like there's so much funk and soul that is in Dorian mode. There's a lot of songs that are truly there, like Good Times by Chic, but if you're thinking of like... Right? Good times. That song just consists of E minor and A major, which would be in the key of E minor. It would be an A minor as the 4 chord, but in this case it's an A major, and that's because a major 4 chord is what you get in Dorian mode. Phrygian mode has this weird thing where you end up with a B flat major chord. It's basically a 2 chord that is flat. So you get this cool thing where you have chord progressions like this. And here's what I'm trying to say. When people think about the major modes, or the minor modes, any modes really, but we're talking about minor right at this moment, they think, okay, we're just generally in a minor key, and we aren't obligated to only play the chords from this scale. We can play other chords, but we're not playing random other chords. We're playing other chords that we stole from. Here's a chord that we stole from Phrygian mode. And then over here, here's a chord that we stole from Dorian mode. Sometimes you'll see a song that might have a major 4 chord like this, and it might also have this funky flat 2 chord from Phrygian. You see this a lot in the major key as well. I want to talk about that for a minute. Okay, what are the chords in the key of A major? These are the chords in the key of A major. A major, B minor, C sharp minor, D major, E major, F sharp minor, G sharp diminished, excuse me, and then we're back to A major. So you get cool little progressions, classic progressions like that's just messing around with just this exact, this exact set of chords. We're just messing around. With Mixolydian, it basically is a major scale, but with a flat 7. So that means, in this case, that means we have a G instead of a G sharp. Well, that turns this chord right here. Here, I'll show you on the wheel. A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A. So here, if instead of G sharp, we have now just a regular old G, well, that takes a chord that was G sharp, B, D, and it turns it into just G, B, and D. And this is probably one of the classic chords, one of the classic Mixolydian sounding chord progressions is when you write something that's like, oh, clearly we're just in the key of A major. I could even play like F sharp minor in there. So if we listen to this kind of chord progression, it's going to sound pretty familiar. We've got right. Well, if I were to play this afterward, G, F sharp, E, something like this, it's going to sound cool and it's going to sound nice because we're borrowing that G from Mixolydian mode without thinking, oh, I'm going to switch my whole thing to Mixolydian. It's just like, well, yeah, Mixolydian is a major mode. We're just going to steal a chord. So check it out, G. That G is kind of outside of the key of A major. Well, it is outside of the key of A major because A major, again, has a G sharp in it. But we're borrowing a chord from A Mixolydian just for a second. Kind of cool, huh? A lot of people think about 1, 4, 5 chord progressions. And it's like we've got like La Bamba and all those kind of na 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 na. Right, or you know what? Well, some people call me the space cowboy. Yeah, those are all 1, 4, 5 progressions. But there's one song that people hear and they think it's a 1, 4, 5, but it's actually a Mixolydian chord progression Because in Mixolydian, because of that G, E major in the key of A, it's an E major because it's E, G sharp, B. In Mixolydian mode, this would be an E minor. And it turns out the song Louie Louie by, was it the Kingsmen, I think, is a 1-4-5 in Mixolydian. And it has a minor 5 chord. And that sounds like this. Check out the difference. Right. Oh, baby, said we gotta go. Yeah. Right? So that is sort of the trick. Now, we got a question here. Talia Ryan says, how do you recommend memorizing these? So here's the deal. Talia, your question is important. So important, we gotta go to Guitar Church. How do I memorize all this stuff? Well, first of all, I got a question for you. Why do you want to memorize this stuff? What's the point? Imagine if I told you that before you could speak any English, you have to memorize the dictionary. That wouldn't make sense, right? The goal of the dictionary is to increase your vocabulary when needed, or to figure out a word that you don't know. To insist that someone memorize the entire dictionary before they speak their mind, before they speak English, would be kind of a wild thing to think about. What we really want to think about instead is, why would the dictionary even be useful? Rather than thinking, I need to memorize the dictionary before I speak English, you think, I need to start speaking my mind and getting my thoughts out into the world. And when I get stuck, when I can't figure out how to say what I want or how I feel or what I need or communicate with other people, that's when I pull out the dictionary to find a word that helps me express myself. You don't do it the other way around. It's the same with music theory. You don't study all the music theory and try to get all the music theory down and then go, okay, now I'm gonna write music. Now I'm gonna express myself. That is backwards. If I sound mad, I'm not, I'm just passionate. The best way to memorize music theory is to start by memorizing what's actually useful to you. For me, that would be memorize the chords in the major key or the chords in the minor key and practice putting them together and making music, using them to actually do stuff that sounds good to you and that's fun. And once you hit a wall, once you go, I feel like there's more sounds that I need to express myself, then that's when you study more. And then it'll be easier to memorize that stuff because it's stuff you actively want to use right then. Don't do it backwards. Don't start by trying to memorize a bunch of music theory stuff. Start by trying to make music. Start by trying to express yourself. Start by getting yourself in a position where you feel like, I'm stuck and I don't know what to do. I know I could be better at something. Then that's when you start studying the music theory. If you want to, come check out my school. That's mainly what I try to do, is I try to give you the tools you need to express yourself better. I've got music theory courses, I've got caged basics, I've got melody making, weekly writing prompts. Basically, I call it community challenges. My patrons get to participate together toward a common goal of writing something. The other week it was write something spooky. It might just be as simple as write something in the key of E minor, or write something using Dorian mode, or something like that. And the idea is you just practice writing music. And it's through writing music that you discover those music theory concepts that you want to get to know better. And that's going to help them stick in your head because you're actively trying to use them. So consider that. That's my pitch. Thank you. Let's write some music. Lauren Wise says, my Patreon is awesome. Thank you, Lauren. I appreciate that. There's a lot going on. I've been working on it for over 5 years now, and I'm pretty proud of it. True S Armor says, yeah, but I still don't know what modes are for. Modes are basically more creative outlets, more ways to get more chords. That's the way I like to think of it. So some people say, I'm still trying to understand it. So this is cool. This is fine. I will spend a little bit more time on it then. Basically, modes are for getting more expressive, interesting keys, more expressive, interesting scales, and for making chord progression writing and music writing more fun, more interesting, with more options. That's basically it. Let's go back here for a second. So if these are the chords in the key of A minor, and these are the chords in A Dorian, maybe I will write a piece of music comparing the two. That sounds kind of fun. And I could do that pretty quickly. Let me get some kind of a drum beat going. This is my MIDI controller. surprise keyboard. Wow, that's fun. Here's just kind of another angle, a different way to think about everything we've been talking about. Here is an A, right? If I play an A minor scale versus an A Dorian scale, almost identical except for one note. Well, what I love about keyboard is, compared to guitar, there's a very visual way of seeing the chords in a key. So if I play every other note of the scale, starting with this minor scale, I can play the chords in the key by going A minor, A minor, B diminished, because we've got an F in A minor, and we've got C major, D minor, I burped, E minor, F major, then we've got G major, I have to drop down an octave, and then we're back to A minor. Well, if we compare that to the chords we would get using this F sharp, we still have A minor, now we have B minor, we still have C major, now instead of D minor, we have D major, and then we still have E minor, and then instead of F major, we have F sharp diminished, then we've got G major still, and then we're back to A minor. So that one note ends up changing basically every other chord. So if I were to play like a chord progression like, if I were to play a chord progression like this, well, that's completely unaffected by that note, because I'm avoiding all of the chords that use F or F sharp. But if I were to play a chord progression like this, I go, which sounds awesome. That would be just using this minor key, which, that sounds great. But now, what if I did that in Dorian mode instead? Well, that would sound like this. That's kind of cool. Just a different sound. It's a major chord instead of a minor chord there. We could label those, or we could just look at it linearly on this keyboard like this. However you look at it, modes just give us access to some different flavors. And this to me, oh, how anticlimactic. Is a different flavor that I like. Even though I played it a little out of time. Compare that again to the minor key, which I can grab some notes and flat it. So this is back to A minor. Still cool, it's just different options, different choices. And it's the same with the other modes. We just get different options for chord progressions. Kind of like that Kingsman song I was talking about earlier.